All right, we are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman, and as always, I'm joined by John Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC Vegas 42 going down this Saturday at the Apex. We got a featherweight main event between Max Blessed Holloway and Yair Rodriguez for what figures to be number one contender fight for the next shot at Alexander Volkanovski. John, we're coming off back-to-back numbered pay-per-view weeks. I know last week was certainly a bloodbath for myself. I don't think it went too well for you or really anyone else in our kind of betting circle. So we're looking to bounce back for sure this week, my man. But wanted to start the show by wishing you a happy Veterans Day, thanking you for your service. And for anybody listening to the show, thanking them as well. But my man, we got 11 fights going out tomorrow, but I figure we'll go through the card relatively quickly. How are you doing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the shout out. Appreciate that and appreciate all those that have served past and present. Happy Veterans Day to you guys. And I mentioned it in our Discord about last week for UFC 268, like how at times like this really is a game of inches. For example, I was tilting my face off when I forget which ref it was. Was it Tyone? Who ref the Justin Gaethje Michael Chandler? If you remember, I mean, it doesn't matter. Whoever the ref was in round two, Chandler was literally flash knocked out, and the ref and then follow up shots on the ground. Ref didn't stop it. That would have cashed Justin Gaethje knockout prop. Justin Gaethje knockout in round two at plus 650. That was literally the difference in being a slightly profitable light and getting almost the reverse sweep for -6 units. So like you said, definitely ready to get back on back in the green for UFC Vegas 42. Have a couple spots I like this week. Excited to kick things off and talk through the fights with you.
Yeah, I came close to the reverse sweep as well, and I don't even think I have any real bad beats to complain about. We will just be better. Plain and simple, we'll be better this week. Let's get started here. Only 11 fights, like I mentioned. A few spots that I bet on the card. Overall, not my favorite card in the world in terms of betting. I will be at the Apex tomorrow, or I should say on Saturday. So been a bucket list item to watch Max Holloway in person. So certainly excited for that. But as for the rest of the card, hopefully we'll be able to eke out some profit and make some of these lower tier fights a little bit more watchable. Let's get it started here in the light heavyweight division. We got Da Un Jung, a -120 favorite here. He's $8.3 thousand on DraftKings. He takes on Kennedy and Nzechukwu, who comes back as an even money underdog, plus 100 at 7.9K on DraftKings. John, any action for you here in our first bet of the evening, or our first fight of the evening? It might be the first bet of the evening.
Yeah, I actually only have 3 bets so far. This is one of them. I played Jung at the money line at -124. Tried to do my best Jonah impression and time the market. Did not do it as well as I had hoped because there was a -115 at one point yesterday on DraftKings, and I thought maybe it'd keep moving since a lot of people like Kennedy Nzechukwu this week for whatever reason. But yeah, I like Jung here. I think he's got Kennedy pretty much covered everywhere. I know Kennedy's super long, but I've talked about in the past, he's a guy that doesn't really know how to use that range. Guys typically close the distance against him, no problem. Jung, I think, is going to be walking forward. He's going to land the heavier shots. I think he has better wrestling if he goes to it. I know he's not like a super good wrestler, but he landed, 8 takedowns against William Knight. And I know he didn't control him for long stretches there, but Kennedy doesn't really have much of a ground game. I just think Jung is pretty much better wherever the fight goes here. I don't understand the line movement in favor of Kennedy here. He's just somebody that I've never been super impressed with, even though he has made improvements since the first time we've seen him, where I just thought he was like really bad. He definitely gained a little bit of respect his last time out for me, but I still think Jung is just better. Like I said, pretty much wherever the fight goes. So seeing it this close to a pick, I had to play Jung, like I said, at the money line for a unit -124.
Yeah, so no action for me here on the first fight of the night. I do kind of agree with most of your reasoning behind Jung. I do think he's the better wrestler. He's unbeaten in the UFC, obviously, as the draw against Sam Alvey, but he has shown off a little bit of wrestling. He's a powerful guy. He's a little bit low volume at time on the feet, which makes him, I think, difficult to back. And the only reason I'm not backing him here is, I don't think that Kennedy is that great of a fighter, but if he is one thing, he's pretty durable. He has good cardio. I think we saw that kind of to the fullest extent in his last 2 fights, the Danilo Marquez fight, where he's controlled the first 2 rounds, comes back with a knockout in round 3. And then, of course, the Carlos Ulberg fight where he's like getting the absolute snot beaten out of him and then comes back to get the knockout win after his opponent gasses. So, like, I don't think Kennedy is very good. And I agree that Jung is better. At the current market, if I had to bet a side, I would definitely bet Jung at about minus 120. It's just, at a division like light heavyweight where I don't rate Jung's skill set that highly in and of itself, I just don't want to get involved here where I think he's better than Kennedy, but like I could also see a situation where he wins the first round, starts to slow down, and then Kennedy just kind of does his thing of surviving and then coming back and winning a fight, basically just by having a pulse come later on in the rounds. But Jung hasn't historically struggled a ton with his cardio. I mentioned that I think he'll have success both in the clinch, and you mentioned the wrestling, 8 takedowns against William Knight. That figures to serve him well this weekend, so I'll pick Jung as well. Let's move on to the second fight of the evening here, which features my first bet of the night. We got Mark Diakise. He's minus 190 at current market against Rafael Alves. Alves comes back plus 160. Diakise 8.7K on DraftKings, and Alves is $7.3 thousand on DK. I bet Mark Diakise here at minus 175. It's not a spot that I feel super confident in. I think it's tough to feel super confident in Mark Diakise in general. But I mean, if we just look at the skill sets of these two guys, it's mostly a fade on Rafael Alves, right? Who makes his UFC debut at 30 years old. He originally misses weight for his debut. And I know there's a little bit of a backstory there, but the guy comes in overweight, has to move up a weight class. He fights Samir Smagulov, which is a tough debut, let's be honest. But in that fight, he had his moments. I think he actually performed better than what the betting odds would have indicated, better than what I expected. But you go back and watch the tape on this guy, Alves, who someone I actually faded on Contender Series back in the day. I just don't think he brings many skills to the table that are going to get him wins at the UFC level. First of all, he's a freak athlete. That's what the good part is, right? Like, this guy has a nasty guillotine, super athletic, seems to hit hard. Like, he moves decently. There's nothing inherently that would make you think that he's like not able to out athlete guys at the lower levels of MMA. But when you look at his actual skill sets, man, like, his wrestling is not very good. We saw him put on his back against Ismagulov. His fight IQ, I don't think is very high either. Like, I seen this guy hurt guys, and he has a good guillotine, but he's so happy to just kind of flop to his back and go for submissions here. I think his gas tank is really poor. His best round against Ismagulov was round 3, but that kind of, I think, was an anomaly. You go back and watch this guy's track record. He's someone who historically slows down really badly in fights. Part of that was kind of probably due to the weight cut. We knew that weight cut was going to be hard for him. That's why he moved up, and he carries a lot of muscle mass with him. But I just don't think he's someone who's going to win a lot of fights at the UFC level. And Mark Diakise, say what you want about the guy. I'm certainly not his biggest fan, but he's a solid kickboxer. He stood in there against guys like Nasrat Haqparast, Rafael Fiziev, Dan Hooker. Like, he's gone late into fights with all of those guys. He's fairly durable, good kickboxer. His wrestling is okay. I worry a little bit that he's going to do a classic Mark Diakise and just like stick his neck into a guillotine choke on a takedown attempt. But for the most part, man, I think that Alves is pretty finish reliant in round 1 and round 2. And so I laid it with minus 175 with Diakise. I don't think it's too good past that point. I see some minus 190s in the market. I'd be kind of hesitant about playing it. Usually I think there's a decent amount of leeway when I release plays, but got a minus 175 last night. I kind of just think that's kind of bordering on the edge of where the value lies in this matchup. So I took the shot on the Bone Crusher, but certainly not a spot that I feel uber confident in. It is a 1-unit play for me. John, any action for you here on the second fight of the night?
No, but I agree with a lot of what you said. I think there isn't really an argument here that Diakise is clearly the better minute winner here. Alves historically more of a finisher. I don't want to make we always make the comparison to like the Derek Minner types where it's like, kill or be killed, or they're opportunistic finishers early in the fight, and then they tend to kind of wilt as the fight goes on. And I don't want to say he's one of those, but he certainly has those tendencies. You alluded to, he's got a nice guillotine, but when he's not finishing that guillotine, we don't really like to back guys that are jumping guillotine every 5 minutes or whatever, especially, once you get to this level of fighting, you tend to see those type of finishes a lot less than you did on the regional scene. And Alves is a guy who, like you said, athletically speaking, super powerful. He's got a ton of power, especially early in the fights, decent opportunistic grappler. But, a lot of what he does here, I think, is negated by Diakise, who's clearly more well-rounded. I think the wrestling is going to be key here. I think he can land takedowns here. We've seen that in multiple fights. I think it was, I wrote up in my article, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I think Diakise's last 3 decision wins, he's landed 13 takedowns over those 3 decision wins. So it's a clear thing where, like, I know he's not known as a wrestler, but in fights where he does have a wrestling advantage and it does go a full 15 minutes, we've seen him repeatedly go to those takedowns. And I think we see that happen here as the fight goes on. So I agree with you. I think he's probably the side. I thought about maybe taking a shot at like an Alvarez prop if we saw like a huge number on like an Alvarez first round finish or something like that. But honestly, like, actually, FanDuel didn't even open the props for like half of the prelims yet. I don't know what they're doing this week. They're just taking the week off, I guess, after a big pay-per-view. But the other props I saw, like, we didn't even see a super big number for Alvarez props. So I think it's just a pass for me. Dia Casey is probably the side. In terms of DraftKings, I do think it's a decent fight to target, because if we do think Dia Casey lands multiple takedowns here, banks some control time, does enough to get the win, he's a pretty solid play. And then on the flip side, if Alvarez does pull off the upset, which we really don't think he does, but if he were, his win condition is likely an early finish. So I think it's a decent target on DraftKings this week.
Yeah, John, it's funny you mentioned like you wouldn't describe him, or we don't think of him, I would say, as a wrestler with Martin Casey. But for someone who we don't think of that way, there certainly seems to be a pretty strong correlation between the amount of takedowns he lands and whether he gets the win or not. So I do think he'll be able to kind of wrestle this weekend. I do also think he's just a stronger kickboxer at range and is pretty defensively sound. So I do favor him in this fight by a considerable margin. Not the most trustworthy guy in the world, but loads of UFC experience, well-rounded skill set against a guy who's pretty finish reliant. And I don't think it's too long for the UFC. Let's move on to the third fight of the evening between Courtney Casey, who's a minus 240 favorite. She's 8.8K on DraftKings. Never really thought I would get to the 8.8K price range for Courtney Casey. Sounds weird just coming out the mouth, but she faces Lyanna Jojua, who's plus 195. As the underdog in this spot is Jojua. She is just $7.4 thousand on DraftKings. And, I think this is one of those matchups where it's kind of low level, right? But we have this weird divide between the two fighters where we look at Courtney Casey. Her record is 500, right? She's literally 9-9 as a professional MMA fighter, but I'll pull up her page right now. Like, you just look at the girls that she's losing to, man. Like, obviously there's some not so great losses in there, but like Claudia Gadelha, Michelle Watterson, Calvillo, Jillian Robertson, these are mostly top 10, top 15 girls in her weight class, and they're also solid grapplers. And then on the other side, we have Lyanna Jojua, who is 1-2 in the UFC at this point, has been stopped twice, once due to a doctor stoppage, once due to just getting absolutely dominated by Sarah Moras. So like, I just don't think that Jojua is very good. It's hard to look at a price like minus 240 with Courtney Casey and really feel confident she gets the job done, because as we know, the biggest threat to Courtney Casey is anything that could take her down, which at times can just be a gust of wind. And that is what Jojua historically has succeeded at. We haven't really seen it at the UFC level, but 8 of her 9 or 6 of her 8 wins, I should say, have come by submission. She's somebody who she likes to go for that patented women's MMA armbar. I think an interesting spot in this fight is like maybe Casey by submission. I think she might be able to out-grapple Jojua. Or really, I saw like fight ends by submission at plus 300 on FanDuel. I'm not sure I want to get involved in this fight, but to be honest, this kind of feels like a fight that has armbar from guard written all over it. Like, I think Jojua, if she shoots takedowns, will likely be able to get 1 or 2. And we know Casey's going to be throwing up submissions off of her own back. Hypothetically, Jojua is a decent grappler in terms of submission victories, but I'm not so sure I've seen it at the UFC level. So long way to say I think Casey should win the fight. Am I ever laying minus 240 on her? Probably not. And I do think that a finish is more live here than the betting line suggests. Like, oftentimes in these low-level women MMA fights, everyone just thinks, oh, like, it's going to decision. It'll be a boring decision. Like, I low-key think that this could be kind of a crazy fight that sees a finish at some point, despite the skill level or finishing ability of each woman not being super great. So maybe a small play or a unit play for me on the ends by submission here in Jojua versus Casey. John, anything for you here on our third fight of the evening?
Yeah, you said probably not laying it with Courtney Casey. So that's a good thing, because if you were, we might have to throw hands here. Friends don't let friends lay chalk on Courtney Casey. I do like the fight ends by sub look, though. I kind of breezed over this fight, to be honest. So I actually didn't see that till you brought it up.
Plus, I'm going to check the prices right now.
Yeah,
to double check.
If that's plus 300, that's bettable in my opinion. Just because, like you said, like, I think Casey's probably a better positional grappler here. Jojua probably more like meme style grappler, like you alluded to. But Casey's kind of the same way. We've seen her flop to her back. She had that armbar against, was it Romero Barella? Was that the fight she got the first round armbar?
Yeah, well, yeah. She like submitted her. She went straight down and just got the armbar off her back. I
Yep.
think Casey might have multiple armbar wins in the
Yep.
UFC.
Yeah. So she's kind of an armbar specialist herself, but she is a black belt. I do think you could probably make an argument the line is why Jojua is improving. I know she's not like super great, but she's young, she's improving, she's more aggressive and more physical, in my opinion. And those are attributes that I think play more at the lower levels of WMMA. And, you know, we saw multiple times now with Courtney Casey, like can't stuff the takedowns. She's terrible at defending takedowns, but even on the feet, like she's a decent boxer. She has a good jab, but she doesn't throw it enough. You know, a lot of these times she's not winning rounds, even when she should be winning rounds. And that's what worries me about seeing Casey Price as a favorite here. We've seen how many times now she has like, what, 6 or 7 fights in the UFC that ended in split decision. Like she's going to split decision because her margins are so thin. Like even when she's the better fighter, like she is in this matchup, I could see her losing 1 or even 2 rounds here. So I think Jojua is someone that I would consider a live dog, even though I think Casey's probably better everywhere. So it's kind of one of those fights where I think Casey by split decision is probably the most likely outcome. Like I said, I do like that fight ends by sub, just because I wouldn't be shocked if either went for a few submissions here. But yeah, overall, it's probably not going to be a big target for me on an 11 fight slate. I think there's still better fights to target on DraftKings.
Yeah, so I just looked it up. Looks like the plus 300 I found. I thought it was on FanDuel. It was on DraftKings last night. That's dropped to plus 275. I do see a 290 at FanDuel, so that's currently the best market price on the fight to end by submission. I think Casey has a big advantage on the feet here, as Pepe Silva is saying in the chat. I think that Casey's going to win on the feet. It just feels like every Courtney Casey fight somehow ends with her on her back at some point in time, or just the 2 women falling down. So I think the ends by sub is decent. I also think the under is decent. Like I think that Casey could knock her out, but probably not like a standing KO, but more of like an accumulation of damage sort of deal. So I think that a finish is more alive than the betting odds suggest in our third fight of the evening. Let's move on to our next fight, which has what I believe is the second biggest favorite on the card here. We got Sean Woodson, currently minus 335 against Colin Anglin, comes back plus 260. DK prices here. Woodson is 9.2K. Anglin is 7K. And I'll go first here, John, because I'll be relatively quick, I should say. No action for me in this matchup. I feel like the line is pretty accurate. We got a guy in Sean Woodson who's extremely long for the 145-pound division. Throws a good amount of volume. Historically, has kind of struggled a little bit when guys get to his legs and are able to take him to the ground, but really has more so struggled with his cardio, like when pushed into deep waters. Obviously, the Julian Erosa fight comes to mind, but we've seen him taken down in every UFC fight to date so far. We've seen him taken down on the Contender Series as well. So clearly some flaws in Woodson's game, but throws a ton of volume on the feet. His hands, his boxing, pretty sharp in my opinion. He throws flying knees up the middle, uses that length. I would say uses his length pretty decently. And then Colin Anglin on the other side, man, pretty basic striker in my opinion. UFC debut, got knocked out by Melsick, who we saw last weekend. Not really show any initiative to try and get a knockout, but he was able to finish Anglin. Anglin, I think, is just a pretty basic, like he's a decent wrestler, but only against super low level guys. Like he'll go to his wrestling against lower level guys and be successful. And when I say lower level, I mean like regional scene dudes. Like I'm not sure there's a ton of guys that this guy is going to be able to put a top control clinic on inside the UFC. His striking really not that impressive. Seems mostly durable. You know, I said he got knocked out by Melsick, but it took a head kick. He survived the first round where he ate a bunch of shots. I kind of just expect Woodson to coast here. I think he wins either a decision. I could see a knockout, but more likely than not, I think he gets a decision here. Minus 335, big price to pay for a guy who we know is as flawed as Sean Woodson. But I think there will be more fade opportunities down the line. Market still seems pretty high on this guy, but I would not think that this is it. I think he gets the job done this weekend. I do not think he's necessarily worth a ton of exposure on DraftKings at 9.2K. Max Holloway, obviously 9.5. We'll get to him a little bit later in the show. Surely makes for a really strong DK play. And with just 11 fights, man, like it's hard to go and pay for the 2 most expensive fighters on the slate, especially when there's not a lot of underdogs that I like personally. So I'll probably be pretty underweight on Sean Woodson. But if you like the spot for him more than I do, you know, a lot of people are going to be thinking similarly that, you know, you can't pay up for both Woodson and Holloway. It's difficult to make lineups like that. So potentially a spot where you could pay up to be contrarian, but I don't think it'll be for me this weekend. John, any interest for you in either DFS or the betting markets for this fight?
Yeah, this is it's one of those things where it's like you think one guy's going to win here pretty clearly. You think Woodson's going to win, but in terms of DraftKings, I'll probably have zero Woodson, and I'll definitely have exposure to Colin Anglin, even though I think, like you said, he's not somebody that I'm super impressed with. But at the very least, he is like a former Division II wrestler or something like that. Like he is an okay wrestler, like you mentioned, and yes, he hasn't fought really anybody notable or beaten anybody notable. Sean Whitson's going to absolutely piece this dude up on the feet, similar to what Melsick did in round 1 of that fight. And Woodson's a guy who has great cardio as the fight goes on. He's one of those fighters that kind of builds as the fight goes on. Like rounds 2 and rounds 3 is where he's really going to start to get off on Anglin, in my opinion. But Anglin at least could potentially expose the takedown defense, which so far has been pretty good for Woodson. But when he is taken down, he has pretty much no sense of a ground game. He has no sense of defensive grappling. We've seen that kind of get exposed before as well. Was that his last fight where he was submitted in the 3rd round, or the fight before?
Woodson beat Zalal by like a close split, but he was submitted by Arosa the fight before in the 3rd round. It was like a crazy comeback. I think he knocked down Arosa late in the fight and then got subbed.
Yep. Yeah. And you saw that in that fight. Like the dude has like pretty much no form of defensive grappling. Like, I mean, it's pretty bad. So just seeing this big of a price tag on somebody with such clear major flaws, and the guy that he's fighting potentially can take advantage of them. Like I said, I don't think he does, but I just think it's enough to say that this line is probably wide here, and I'm willing to take a little bit of exposure to Anglin, who's a guy that I don't really think is going to be all that owned on an 11 fight slate. So I think he's an interesting underdog to kind of get different with, and has at least the potential to score well if he could pull off the upset.
Yeah, this kind of feels like a flying knee knockout waiting to happen. It's like we've seen this situation in the last 2 weeks, one with Makwan and Murakami, and then last week with Michailidis, who lost, like where they kind of controlled the first round. Makwan like actually dominated the first round of his fight before getting the flying knee knockout loss. But like last week, I obviously had a bet on Michailidis, and like he won the first round, but it was one of those times where you win the first round. He won the first round like I expected him to, with like control, cage push. He tried to grapple, but wasn't super successful. But you still kind of felt like you were drawing pretty thin once the second round started, despite the fact that he was up 10-9. I could easily see that in the cards this weekend. Like Anglin kind of cage pushes in round 1, has a little bit of success, and then just runs into a flying knee in round 2. But look, you got to play an underdog somewhere on DraftKings. So I don't hate your call. I'm not sure I'll get there too much myself, but at some point you got to differentiate from the field and save some money. So it looks like Colin Anglin will be that spot for you this weekend, John. Let's move on to our next fight. And this is a fight that we are doing right now on the show as 5th. I believe it has been upgraded to the main card, but we got Miguel Baeza versus Chaos Williams going down, and what should be, I think, one of the more competitive fights this weekend, and probably one of the most exciting ones. We got Baeza currently lined -145. Williams is +125. DK prices: Baeza is 8.5K. Chaos Williams is $7,700 on DraftKings. As I mentioned, I believe this fight was moved up to the main card, but we'll do it now on the show just in case those fight card changes were not updated. And this is a spot where I kind of like 2 bets. I like Miguel Baeza, and I like the under in this spot. I have not placed a bet on the fight yet. With Miguel Baeza, this is a guy who came into the UFC, pretty good striker in my opinion. He throws really strong calf kicks. I think that's probably the best element of his striking game. Got a TKO win via leg kicks in his debut. Then the Matt Brown fight was kind of back and forth, but ended up knocking out Matt Brown. And then Takashi Sato gets a submission win. Lost a pretty much one of the best fights of the year, I would say, against Ponzinibbio his last time out. Baeza, to me, is a guy who came into the UFC, and I thought he was a solid offensive striker, pretty flawed defensively. The Matt Brown fight kind of showed me that I was correct. He got rocked by an old man in that fight. Obviously, Matt Brown still carries a lot of power. We saw that most recently in the Diego Lima fight, but this was a guy in Baeza who I thought solid offensively, gets hurt a lot on the feet. He doesn't bring his hands up. Good kicking game. And I actually think his grappling is decent. Like we saw it against Sato. It was basically got that fight to the ground, and it was after it was over not soon thereafter, I should say. And with Chaos Williams, man, this is a guy who I rate his technique a hell of a lot lower than Miguel Baeza, but the way he fights is kind of in his name, right? Like chaos. This guy is going to wing hooks at you. We saw him enter the UFC with, what was it, 2 knockouts and a combined under a minute between the Morono fight and then the Al Hassan fight. Like, he comes out swinging. He hits really hard for the weight class. I think his defensive grappling, if you go back and watch him on the regional scene, pretty sketchy. I've not really seen anything at the UFC level that makes me think that this guy's going to be able to defend takedowns. In the UFC, was taken down twice by Michel Pereira, but was able to get up. I just don't think Chaos is very good. I think that Baeza is just a better technical fighter than him. I think he'll beat him in the striking. I think the low calf kick is a good weapon. I haven't really seen Chaos check kicks in the past before. And I also think, I don't know if Baeza is likely to wrestle, but should he get this fight to the ground, I expect it to be relatively easy work for him. I wouldn't be surprised if he finds a finish within a minute or two of getting on top. So I like Baeza here. I think a minus 130 price tag is a little bit short. I will say, still have a little bit of concern about his kind of chin, not even his chin issues, but his hitability issues. Like, this guy eats punches with his face relatively consistently. And if there's one thing we got to give Chaos Williams credit for, it is he seems to hit extremely hard. So I might play the under 2.5 rounds here at like minus 125 in addition to Baeza. His money line, I think there's a decent chance both win. Like, I think that Baeza is just better than the guy. I will say that Williams has looked pretty durable throughout his career. He's never been finished, but I think it's pretty hard for both the under to lose and for Baeza to lose the fight. Like, I think a Williams decision is pretty unlikely in this spot. I rate the technical ability of Miguel Baeza quite a bit higher than Williams, but that's my take on the fight. No official bets yet, but be on the lookout at ftmbets.com. Should be something coming from me either late tonight or early tomorrow. John, anything for you here in Baeza versus Williams and what figures to be one of the more competitive fights tomorrow night?
Yeah, we're on the same side in this one. I played Baeza at the money line at minus 136. What's just talking through your breakdown? I agree with everything you said. What's the because you usually look at these props before I do. What's the Baeza decision only line on DraftKings? Have you seen that yet? Or
yeah, so I'm going to pull that up as we're talking. The only things I've seen in that market this week are Max Holloway is a decision only. He's minus 1,400, which I actually think is pretty accurate. We'll get to that fight a little bit later. I do think the props for this market, and I'm obviously kind of buffering here as I pull up the current prices, but I do think the prices in this market for the Yadong versus Arce fight, which is another closely lined fight, are interesting this weekend. But if we look at the decision only line here, we got Miguel Baeza minus 250 by decision. I think that is probably close to accurate.
Yeah.
You think like about that is right?
Yeah, I was hoping for like a minus 180, minus 190. So I mean, minus 250. I'm not going to bet that, but like you said, I would be shocked kind of here if Williams wins the decision. I don't really even understand how he's plus 125 here. I think his only real win condition is a knockout, and obviously that is live. But does it happen 45% of the time or whatever? Like, I doubt that. Probably like Baeza is a guy who I think I've said this before. I've had some form of money on Miguel Baeza in every single fight in the UFC. And most of the time it's Baeza by knockout. I did cash the Baeza by submission when at 12-1, which is his first submission. That one was good. Baeza is just a guy who I like. I think he's technically sound. He's getting better. He's improving. He's got nasty leg kicks, decent boxer. The concern with Baeza has always been, like you said, he just doesn't play defense. Like, he gets so excited in the pocket and he's swinging these crazy hooks and he just leaves his head out there to be hit. So we've seen him do the chicken dance a couple times. But now coming off the loss against Ponzinibbio, I think that was good to see him have his first career loss against a veteran, a skilled veteran who we respect in Ponzinibbio. Now I just think we see him bounce back here. I think he's going to look good. I think he's the better fighter. I just think he really has to avoid getting knocked out here and he gets the job done. So I laid it at minus 136 for a unit. I do think the under 2.5 is probably a good look. I think you said minus 125. I didn't see that, but I think that's certainly playable. I saw a fight ends by knockout at minus 130 on FanDuel. I don't know if I play that, but I think it's about right because I do think a knockout is more likely here than a decision. But I just think Baeza money line is good enough to play by itself. So that's the way I played it. And on an 11 fight slate, this is one of the best fights, I think, to target on DraftKings. So I'm going to have exposure to both sides.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend too much more time on this fight, but I see Baeza by sub, like plus 750 on FanDuel. It's a tough spot because I always find it difficult to handicap guys like Baeza, who I don't think are that likely to shoot takedowns offensively. Like, how many takedowns has this guy landed in the UFC. He's landed literally 2 of them, and one of them ended by submission. Like, he's certainly not a guy, even the Ponzinibbio fight where he was hurt multiple times, like wasn't shooting consistently. Like, he's not a guy who's going to consistently try and cash you a by submission ticket. But I do think that the gap, should the fight hit the ground at any point, is going to be pretty noticeable between the two. So like, I don't know. It's tough to price something where Baeza might not shoot a takedown all fight, but if the two guys fall down and they end up on the ground with Baeza on top, he could look like minus 150 to win by submission in that scenario. You know what I mean? Like, it just could be one of those dominant level sort of deals. And we have seen Baeza get a UFC finish by submission before, so I probably don't get involved with the buy sub price. I think I'm going to play the under. I'll play some Baeza money line with you, John. I think he's the spot, or I should say, I think he's the side come this weekend. Let's move on to our next fight here. And this is one that I think you got action on, John. We got Cynthia Calvillo, currently a minus 135 favorite, $8,200 on DK against Andrea Lee, who comes back plus 115, $8K for Andrea Lee. I mentioned the DK prices as I do for every fight, but I think this is a relatively important fight for DraftKings, and not because I think they're super likely to be a finish or that the winner will score extremely high, but we talk a little bit about game theory. The last 2 weeks, I think we had 14 fights on that UFC 268 card, maybe 13 the week before. Those are weeks where you need to hit absolute ceiling outcomes from 6 fighters in order to win GPPs on DraftKings. This week, where there's only 11 fights, we haven't even hit weigh-ins. There's a chance that, hopefully not, but there's a chance we lose more fights before the card even starts. I weigh win equity a little bit higher on these weeks. Like, you kind of just need 6 fighters who win, because we might not even see 6 finishes on the card. And this is obviously the closest lined fight on the card. That's why one fighter is 8.2K and the other one is 8K. So I think if you have a strong take on this fight, it's kind of a solid spot for on DraftKings if you want to get involved on DK to kind of take a heavy stance, because I think there will be a lot of similar builds this weekend. And you could differentiate a little bit if you plant your flag on one side. For me, not sure I'll plant a flag, but John, looked in the FTN bets tracker. Looks like you have your third and final play of the week on this fight. Talk to me about what you're looking at in Andrea Lee versus Cynthia Calvillo.
Yeah, you mentioned planting your flag. That's something I'm definitely going to be doing on Andrea KGB Lee this week. I actually think this is a really good spot for her. I backed her at the money line at plus 116 over on FanDuel for 2 units. I just think this is a good spot for her. Cynthia Calvillo is somebody that we've seen repeatedly. Like, yes, she has a little bit of a wrestling base. We've seen her repeatedly just not go to it, even when she would have a wrestling advantage. The Chukagian fight comes to mind, but we've seen it in previous fights as well. Like, she just sits there and tries to box for 15, 25 minutes, whatever. Like, it's just one of those things where I can't back these fighters that don't use their biggest strengths. And I'm not even sure that is her biggest strength in this matchup. I know Andrea Lee has struggled in the past with being taken down, but Lee is also able to land takedowns here. Lee's going to be bigger. She's going to be more physical. She has a 5-inch reach advantage. I think she's going to be stronger. She has probably better judo, I believe. She typically likes to reverse her opponents or possibly if Cynthia tries to close distance and they get in a clinch. I actually think Lee could judo throw or judo trip her. I think Lee is actually probably more likely to land takedowns here, and I think that's probably a hot take because Lee, we've seen her taken down by a lot of people, but Lee is just, I think she's a better striker here. I think she's clearly the better striker. Cynthia is basically a one-dimensional boxer. Like, she has a decent jab and okay footwork, but that's literally it. And so Cynthia is the type where if she either doesn't have interest in wrestling or she can't get the wrestling going, which is kind of, I kind of think it's going to be a combination of both here. And then she just kind of has no plan B. She just dances around and tries to jab. And for somebody that doesn't have a ton of power, I think that's a problem here because Lee, I think, is much better on the feet. She's more technically sound. She's got a better jab. She's the bigger fighter. She's going to be landing the heavier punches. And like I said, I just think she's going to be the more physical of the two in the clinch exchanges and the wrestling exchanges. So I backed her at the money line. I think she's the side here. I think it's pretty clear that she's the side, and I think she's the more high upside play on DraftKings as well. So you mentioned planting your flag. That's who I'm planting with it on KGB Lee. She came through for us in her last fight against Antonina. I think she comes through for us against Cynthia here. So what do you say about that one, Jonah?
Well, I'll bounce it back to you real quick because I'll procrastinate my answer. What are you going to do on DK? Like you mentioned you're planting your flag, obviously, in the betting market. I think it's a good fight. Like, obviously, you feel strongly about the Lee side. Like, are you going to be, how overweight are you on DK? Like, it sounds like you don't think she finishes the fight, but like, do we need that on 11 fight slate? Like, how do you approach a fighter like Andrea Lee in this spot on DK?
Yeah, so I'm with you. 11 fights here. We kind of just need wins, right? Especially like an underdog win. Like she may be the only underdog that wins here. And Lee's the type of fighter, she has enough output. And if she does by chance land a takedown or two, like she could score okay. Like I don't think she's going to score. Like she's not the type of fighter where we're worried that she's going to pull a Hernandez and score like 52 points in a win. Like I don't think that's Andrea Lee. So, and I do think she has upside to finish. You know, obviously it's more likely to go to decision. And I might even add and play Andrea Lee by decision. I didn't look to see if that's even out yet on FanDuel, but yeah, I mean, I just think she's clearly the side here. Pepe in the chat brought up a good point. Cynthia was better grappling at 115. Yeah, you know, she's what, 1-2 since moving up to 125. I just think it's a size thing here, a physicality thing. I don't think this is the right weight class for her. And I think it's a difficult matchup against somebody who I think has kind of been shitted on in the market just because she's lost so many close decisions. You know, I bring it up like every time we break down an Andrea Lee fight because she's been robbed before in fights that I thought she won against better competition than Cynthia. So I just think she's clearly the side here, but we'll see what happens come Saturday.
Yeah, you know, Andrea Lee is she's not like a black hole in terms of DK scoring. Like she scored 70 in a loss before. Obviously, that was the Modafferi fight. It was close. She landed, I think, the most takedowns of her career in that spot and had a few reversals. But I think she projects like between 70 and 80 DK points in a win. And like obviously that's not like super great. It's probably going to be less than 10x, but on an 11 fight slate at the mid range, like I think you just take the win, especially if she's the underdog and you feel strongly about her winning. In terms of my pick on the fight, since I guess it's my turn to do that, I'll pick Andrea Lee because you're confident in it and I trust your gut. But to me, it's just kind of a fight that I don't know. I don't have any real takes on. Like I think that Calvillo is actually a pretty elite wrestler in terms of her technical skills, but she's small for the weight class, as you just mentioned. She hasn't historically always gone to her wrestling. And Andrea Lee is not like completely incompetent in terms of the grappling. I do think like if Cynthia gets in deep on single legs, double legs, like I think she'll be able to take her down. But it's one of those things where Calvillo doesn't always use her best skill set. I think Lee is going to be able to get up at least once or twice in the fight. Like I don't think a takedown is automatically going to be the round for Calvillo. I don't know if Andrea Lee's going to take her down. I think that is a lot more of a bullish take than I'm willing to give. But I'll let you plant your flag on that one. So I'll pick Lee. But like I think that the only reason I'm not betting her is I think there's way more upside for Calvillo to look like a big favorite in this spot. Like I wouldn't at all be surprised if Calvillo lands 5 or 6 takedowns and looks like minus 200, minus 250 in this spot. I would be pretty surprised if Lee stuffed every single takedown and like absolutely boxed her face off and looked minus 200. Like I just think there's more routes for Calvillo to dominate the fight. But I'm not sure how likely she is even to try it. And if she does, I'm not convinced she gets there. So I'll be rooting for Andrea Lee for you, and I'll pick her. But it's not a spot that I feel supremely confident on. I think the people should trust your read a lot more than mine on this fight. All right, let's move on to the next fight. I got a bet here. Thiago Moises against Joel Alvarez. We got Moises currently minus 265 favorite, 9K. Alvarez comes back plus 215, 7.2K. The prices, of course, for DraftKings this weekend. I laid the chalk here with Thiago Moises. And I think this is kind of a common thread throughout the week in my bets with both Mark Diakise and Thiago Moises, where I'm not necessarily super high on the fighter in general. Like I'm not the biggest Thiago Moises fan in the world, but I just think that they're facing someone who I wouldn't say that Alvarez is like bottom of the barrel in the UFC, and I wouldn't say that about Alvarez either, who's fighting Moises. But I think they're being a little bit overvalued, and we talked about this in the past. Like, how could someone be overvalued if they're plus 200? I mean, the guy's 18-2. He's on a 3-fight win streak inside the UFC after losing his debut in a really tough matchup to Damir Ismagulov. But it's just one of those things where, like, I just think that Moises is way better than this guy. Like, Moises, like, first of all, let's talk about the strength of schedule with Thiago Moises, right? Like, he comes into the UFC, fights Beneil Dariush off the bat, which is, I mean, a guy that's going to be fighting for the 155-pound title potentially within a year. He then goes on to fight Holloway, Ismagulov, Michael Johnson, who, say what you want about Michael Johnson, a lot of experience for a young guy. Bobby Green, he wins the Bobby Green fight. He wins Alex Hernandez fight which was mostly kickboxing. And I think that's probably one of his best performances to date. And then he loses to Islam Makhachev, who Islam is probably the best 155 on the planet. And then we got Joel Alvarez, who's out here beating like Joe Duffy in his retirement fight, Danilo Belluardo in a fight that he was losing up until the point that he won. And then he won via submission, nice armbar off his back against Yakovlev. I lost quite a bit of money on that fight. Like, to me, Alvarez just isn't very skilled. First of all, his biggest skill is probably his guard. Like, he has pretty good chokes off his back. We've seen him with the armbar. Jumps to a guillotine literally every single time someone tries to take him down. Like, his takedown defense is 0% in the UFC. I'm not sure he will ever successfully defend a takedown. It's like he wants to be taken down. It's almost like he uses his opponent's takedown attempts as a way to pull guard. And I just think that's a really tough thing to do against Thiago Moises. I know this guy was submitted by Islam Makhachev his last time out, but Moises is a high-level grappler, man. Had never been submitted before. I think it's going to be the way better submission grappler. Like, I encourage Joel Alvarez to pull guard in this spot against Moises. I think he'll get thoroughly out-grappled on the ground. In fact, I think the gap on the ground is pretty significant, more so than it is on the feet. But I also think that Moises, I should say, deserves to be a favorite on the feet. He's at a reach disadvantage. He's a little bit smaller than Alvarez, who's massive for the weight class, but Moises oftentimes has kind of thin margins on the feet. He's just a little bit low output, but his actual striking and kickboxing, I think, has gotten way better since he got to the UFC. He uses a body kick pretty well. Like, I just think he's better than Alvarez everywhere, man. And like, I know Alvarez has put together a 3-fight win streak. I don't think he's super terrible or anything like that. Like, I think there's winnable fights for him, but he wins mostly off of submissions off of his back. And I don't think he's live for that. I mean, to be fair, I didn't think he was live for that against Yakovlev either, but like, Moises's BJJ game is extremely good. He's not, I would be shocked if he got submitted by like a guillotine on a takedown attempt or a triangle choke, an armbar, something like that from guard. Just seems really unlikely. So look, minus 250 or minus 240 is what I played actually on DraftKings last night. I don't think it's a spot where like I feel super confident in Thiago Moises over the long term, but he's faced a way better strength of schedule, has way more UFC experience, and I think there's just more ways to win the fight. Better striker, better grappler, more likely to spend time on top, more likely to win rounds. Pretty high fight IQ. I saw someone tweet about this today, and I wish I could remember who it was. It might have been Lucrative MMA. He tweeted about Thiago Moises' super high fight IQ, always ends rounds with a takedown attempt. And look, we know MMA judges tend to overvalue the last 30 seconds of a round compared to the first 4 minutes and a half. And as much as I hate that portion of MMA judging, it's a legitimate thing. And Moises knows how to put a stamp on rounds. Like, I just think he's a high IQ fighter who has fought a really tough level of competition and gets a massive step down this weekend. So minus 240 feels like a big price to pay for a guy who I don't think is that great over the long term. But look, I think he's a lot better than Joel Alvarez. I lay the chalk here at minus 240. John, am I crazy for that? I know that you haven't always been the biggest Thiago Moises guy either, but it certainly feels like a winnable matchup to me. Am I crazy here?
You're not crazy at all. You know, I very rarely bet big favorites, but I might even lay it myself come Saturday. Like, I'm that close to thinking Moises is like as close to, I don't want to use the word lock, if you will, but
that word.
You know, it definitely kind of feels that way. And Alvarez is somebody that, you know, one of his fights, I cashed the submission prop. Like, I'm not like an Alvarez hater by any means, but you hit on it. It's like, this dude has very narrow win conditions where he pretty much has to sub you. And now he's facing a guy who's a much better grappler than him, who's a black belt, who's likely going to be in top position, who has only been submitted once by Islam Makhachev. And that even took like 20 minutes of control in order to get that.
Exactly.
and so it's like, he'll be the bigger fighter, 7-inch reach advantage. Like, he's going to be way taller. He's going to look a lot bigger, but you don't even really have to worry about the power. The guy's more of a leg kicker. He's not even a real power puncher. And I don't know, man. Like, and Moises has never been knocked out. He's like never even been hurt or wobbled. So it's like Moises has to submit this guy who only Makhachev has submitted, or he has to knock him out, which he's never been knocked out. And Alvarez, he has like one career knockout.
He has two knockout wins. And like, historically, I mean, look, it's a cage fight, like anything can happen, but like, historically, guys who do not get knockouts prior to the UFC, like, it's very rare you see someone's like knockout rate explode once they start fighting better competition. We see guys get knockouts on the regional scene and then not show power at the UFC level all the time. But the other way around, like, if the guy's 2 KO wins and 18 career wins, like, he probably doesn't carry that much power. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, and I don't even think that's really like much of a possibility here. So I that's a long way of saying, like, I just think his two ways to win here are very, very slim. So if you're looking for a nice parlay anchor, I think Moises is the guy. I think he's a pretty safe play. I'll use safe, not lock, but I'll use the term safe. I think he's a safe play this week, and I think we can move on.
Yeah, let's move on to the next fight, which should be pretty competitive, at least according to the betting line. A fight getting a lot of traction in the MMA Twitter streets. I think the non-casuals are excited for this one. We got Song Yadong minus 130 currently against Julio Arce, who comes back plus 110. The DK prices for Yadong are 8.4K, and for Arce is 7.8K. John, figures to be a relatively competitive fight. We've seen some Julio Arce money come in throughout the week. I'm kicking myself. I saw like a plus 135, plus 140 out there a week or two ago. I did not pull the trigger. Still kind of tempted by Julio Arce. I haven't bet him yet. I do think I might get around to betting him before Saturday, but figures to be a competitive fight. You know, Song Yadong is someone who is extremely highly touted coming into the UFC. And I mean, he's backed it up for the most part. Like, I know there have been some moments, the Cody Stamann fight comes to mind where we've seen him exposed in some facets of the game. Obviously lost to Kyler Phillips, but like, this guy's last two wins, man, are Casey Kenny and Marlon Vera. Like, those have aged pretty well at 135 pounds. I think Song Yadong has lived up to the hype for the most part. And then Julio Arce is someone who came in with a lot less hype. He's an East Coast guy, Ring of Combat guy. Kind of had a career setback when he lost to Brian Kelleher twice on the regional scene in 2015. Comes into the UFC. He's 4-2 inside the promotion. I think he's got 3 finishes. His last 3 wins have come by finish. Knockout against Andre Ewell, obviously, in his last fight, where I had Arce round 3. We almost got there, but he finished him late in the second round. Like, I think Julio Arce is a guy who was not super hyped and has performed above expectations. And Song Yadong is someone who was really hyped and has kind of performed up to the expectations that were set out, despite the fact that they were lofty. So money is coming on Julio Arce. Any action for you here in Yadong versus Arce? Any betting angles that you're looking at, John?
Honestly, no. Like, this is one that I really wanted to bet on because, like you said, it's a fun matchup here against 2 exciting guys. And I think they're gonna go to war here. It's just that I think I just really don't have a strong take one way or the other. Like, I slightly lean Arce. I think he's a cleaner striker. I think he's a little bit more technical. I think his defense is clearly better. You know, Song Yadong is a guy who's very durable, but, you know, similar to Baeza, like, people don't say it as much with him because he's never phased by the strikes, but he eats a lot of clean shots himself. But yeah, I mean, I just think this is going to be a striking match. I think Arce is just a little bit more clean. But, you know, if Yadong pressures him and out volumes him, you know, things could get pretty dicey here. So I didn't bet Arce. Gun to my head, I do think he's the side as the underdog here. But again, it's just not a fight that I have a strong take on. So I'm just going to sit back and enjoy it as a fan.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit earlier about the DK decision-only markets and the DK finish-only markets. I think they're kind of interesting in this fight, John. I'm curious your opinion, despite the fact that you have no action on the fight. If I had to put you on the spot, what would you guess like the finish-only market is? Like, who do you think is favored, and what's the line in the finish-only market?
Finish-only market, I would say they probably have Yadong favorited in that market, but Arce did just get a finish and looked really good doing it. So I don't. It's kind of hard.
It's tough to put you on the spot. They got Arce minus 175 in the scorecards no action market.
Wide.
And I think that's why, man. Like, I like Julio Arce a lot. I might bet him on the money line, but like, if you get Yadong at plus 130, where if it goes to the cards, it's no action. Like, I think he's a historically durable guy. He does get hit a lot, like you just mentioned, but like, I think he has more power than Arce, at least like that we've seen at this weight class before. And then in the decision only market, Yadong is minus 200. And I feel like that line is maybe even more wild. Like, if it goes to decision, do you really think that Yadong is 67% to take it? Like, I feel like Arce is almost borderline more likely to win a decision than Yadong. Like, I just think that both of those markets should be close to 50-50. I think it's a relatively 50-50 fight. And those just seem kind of wide in both of those markets. So I thought that was interesting. Any thoughts in the decision only market for you, John, with Yadong minus 200?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think Yadong could certainly finish if he comes out hot early. Like you said, he hits hard. He's super explosive. We've seen him. He's not known as a finisher, but we have seen him finish before. Like, it wouldn't be the craziest thing, but decision only. I don't know, man. I was leaning, honestly. Get your cleats put it in the chat. The way that I was leaning was Arce by decision. And he said he saw it plus 320. I'm not sure on what book that is, but I think if I had to have any action, and if I do have action, that's going to be the way I play it, is Arce by decision at plus 320.
Yeah, I see it plus 320 on FanDuel, best price available in the market, as FanDuel normally is on these props. So yeah, I might bet Arce at plus 125. I saw a plus 125 pop offshore earlier today. You know, Julio Arce, I think what makes me think he's live in this fight, first of all, I think it's pretty 50-50. Like, I think the margins are very tight. I would not bet, like, if either fighter got to like plus 130, plus 140, I would certainly bet them. Like, I just think it's a very competitive fight. Arce, the reason I'm happy to bet him as an underdog, he does get into these firefights, but he's a very, defensively sound guy. He defends strikes at 67%, which is not a strike I bring up often because it's skewed a lot by like strikes defend. Like, if guys get taken down, they're usually not defending strikes, and so that skews it. But like, Arce is a guy who almost all of his fights have stayed upright for the entirety of them, so I'm comfortable using that type of number. He just mitigates damage pretty well. He doesn't get hit that much, despite the fact that he likes to get into these firefights. Song Yadong, a lot more likely to eat clean shots, I think, here, but might have the striking advantage in terms of the power. So I might play Arce decision only market plus 150. I think that by decision plus 320 is decent. I never really bet guys by decision because it feels like you're like rooting for them, but like not too much because you don't want them to do so well. But maybe that's just a mental block I got to get over. But I do think I'll probably end up backing Arce in some way. But yeah, not a spot that I feel like super strong. I think it's a 50-50 fight. You got either guy at plus 125. I think it's probably worth pulling the trigger for a 1-unit bet. Let's move on to our featured bout on the main card here. We got Felicia Spencer minus 310. She's $9.1 thousand against Leah Letson, who comes back plus 245 for Letson. She's 7.1K on Draftkings. And John, our only back and forth talking about the card leading up to this point. We usually don't like to go back and forth too much because like we got to save it for the show. I look at your bets because I want to be able to tee you up, but like I don't want to know all of your takes. I don't read your article before the show. I read it on Fridays after we record to get all your takes and be able to read through them again on ftndaily.com. But you were mentioning like if you're going to bet Felicia Spencer at this price point, just retire or whatever, something among those lines. And I'm not necessarily going to bet Felicia Spencer, but I'm kind of expecting a one-sided ass whooping this weekend. Like, I'm not the biggest Felicia Spencer fan in the world, but she's a legit 145er who's nasty when she gets on top. She has 2 UFC finishes to this point. I know the UFC run has not gone the way she wanted it to go, although I will say she's basically just fought the best in the world at 145. Like, she fought Cyborg and Nunes are 2 of her 3 losses, and then a close split to Dumont. Leah Letson, man, like, decent boxing. Hasn't fought since 2018, had like serious medical issues that I think originally stemmed from cutting weight. I don't think she was training for a long time. She definitely has been training leading up to this fight. Like, she's been in the gym. It's not like she's coming off the couch. Like, a lot of red flags for Leah Letson, and her grappling is just kind of awful to begin with. Like, I haven't seen anything that makes me think that Felicia Spencer isn't going to be able to do whatever she wants when she gets on top. That said, I think that the striking could be competitive. We have seen Felicia Spencer turn into a K1 kickboxer at times, but I expect her to go to the wrestling here. And actually, I think I might play Spencer either by submission, there's like plus 300s, or by inside the distance, like a plus 200. I just think if she's going to look minus 300, which I'm honestly expecting her to look this weekend, it happens with a lot of time on top. She's got pretty nasty ground and pound, carries legitimate power, 145 pounds, at least in terms of stopping the fight on the ground. And I think her submission skills are decent. Like, Letson is not the worst grappler in the world, but she's never had like a Felicia Spencer raining down ground and pound on her. So say what you want about Felicia Spencer, I still think she's pretty good in top position. I think she gets to dominant positions in this spot. And I think she dominates the fight. I think she wins. I'm not betting her at minus 300, so I don't have to retire or anything like that. But I do think that she makes for a strong play. I don't really know how to approach it on DK. Maybe you can touch on that, John. She's expensive. But if you want to make the case for Leah Letson, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, it's not so much the case for Leah Letson. It's really the anti-case for Felicia Spencer. I believe my words were, if you're betting Felicia Spencer money line, seek help. So I wasn't telling anyone to retire. You just may need to seek help if you're laying chalk like this.
That's what
Felicia
I'm doing
Spencer.
right now. That's me talking to you. I'm seeking help right now. This is like
all right. Well, that's why I'm here, because I'm Pepe in the chat says Spencer is overrated. So I'm a big believer that she's overrated. And obviously she was hyped up coming into the UFC. They wanted to make her like this big, crossover into the UFC, challenge Amanda Nunes for the belt. Like, it wasn't even competitive. Like, come on.
But no one's competitive.
No. But the way that they framed it, it was like she's like, you know what I mean? And then it's like now yeah, she got the sub over Megan Anderson, but it's like, aside from that, like, when has Spencer dominated anybody? It's just
What do
like,
you mean? She's dominated 2 fights in the UFC. She dominated Megan
Zara
Anderson, like,
Farron, bro. She's not
and
even
Megan
like,
Anderson.
isn't she cut? Is Farron even on the roster anymore? And that's another one who had no sense of takedown
I
defense.
don't know,
Like,
but she also dominated Megan Anderson. But what is Leah Letson different than either of those 2 girls? Like, Leah Letson's a
I mean,
decent boxer.
she's not, but the bigger argument I have is, like, people are out there losing their minds that Felicia Spencer wasn't shooting takedowns aggressively on Norma Dumont. Like, we've seen that from Spencer before. Like, she's not, like, people just expected her to be like all of a sudden Curtis Blades, like, aggressively chain wrestling. Like, people
Yeah.
were losing their minds in that fight. Like, her takedown accuracy is worse than Mackenzie Dern. Like, people give Dern shit all the time for wrestling. Like, Felicia Spencer's takedown is what, 10% in the UFC? Like,
It's 10%. Yeah.
she's a terrible wrestler. Like,
But
everybody's like, oh, she's just gonna wrestle and take her down and submit her. Like, she sucks at wrestling. She always has. Like, she's a good grappler, and she has like the Taekwondo striking background, but we've seen that, like, the Taekwondo striking is not
yeah.
it's not
It's
successful
shit.
in the UFC. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not. So in a fight where, if she's not going to shoot takedowns, or at least not going to shoot them as much as she could, and then she finds herself in a striking match, like, is she going to look minus 310? I don't think so. Like, I think Leah Letson probably sucks, but, you know, WMMA coming off a 3-year layoff, like, who knows? Maybe she got better. Like, I think it's more of a case for, like, a blind fade on Felicia Spencer. I mean, that's a lot to say that I didn't bet this fight. But I do think I do think that Leah Letson is not as bad of a play that maybe a lot of people think she is. Now maybe Spencer goes in there and takes her down and submits her immediately, and then I, look like a dumbass, and that's fine. It wouldn't be the first time, but yeah, I mean, I'm out on Felicia Spencer. Like, until she kind of proves it to me, like, I'm just out for now.
Yeah. I just feel like everything is so skewed with Spencer. Like, I think she's probably not as good as some people think, and probably not as bad as some people in your camp think. Like,
That's probably
yes,
right.
she's 2 for 20 on takedowns in the UFC, but she's over 15 against Nunes and Cyborg. Like, you want to know the amount of people that have taken down Amanda Nunes? Like, the number is not that high. The same for Cyborg, and her 2 takedowns in the UFC. So she's 2 for 5 against the other in her other 3 fights outside of the 2 like
So
potential goats.
40% against nobody that can defend takedowns.
Yeah, but she's finished the fight, both of her takedowns, immediately after she's passed him out and finished the fight. Like, I guess I'm not laying minus 300 in this spot, but I do think that the inside the distance prices are worth it. Like, I think if she gets on top, she's gonna finish the fight. Like, I feel confident that Spencer,
Agreed.
she might suck as a wrestler, but she does have a solid top game, which you're not refuting. I just think that is where the inside the distance number makes the most sense this weekend. But we spent a lot of time talking for a fight that Spencer's probably gonna win by decision, and like Letson will get dominated, so you won't be right, but like Spencer won't get close to a finish, so I won't be right. So let's just move on to a very I don't know what we'll call it, an unappealing co-main event, heavyweight co-main event here. We got Ben Rothwell against Marcos Rogerio. De Lima, we got Rothwell currently minus 155 favorite. De Lima plus 135. Big Ben Rothwell, 8.6K on DraftKings. Lima, $7,600 on DK. This is a pass for me, man. Like, I went to war with the heavyweights last week with John Vellante, and he got roundhouse kick knocked out by a 5'8" guy. Like, I don't know if I could go back to the heavyweight this weekend's after that. I do think that, De Lima, I've seen a bunch of people whose opinions I respect on him. Hits hard, has shown some wrestling upside in the past, has like 1 or 2 rounds of cardio, historically quits anytime he gets in a tough position. Ben Rothwell, like, his best performance is probably his win over Barnett recently. Like, we've seen him get hurt versus OSP. He gassed out versus Tybura. He's 40 years old. Hasn't been knocked out in like 10 years. So like durability can be a cheat code at heavyweight at times, especially against guys like De Lima who have poor cardio. But like, man, this is like a complete shit show. And I know I'm the guy who bet on Vellante versus Barnett last week, but I'm passing on this fight. Any opinion for you here in De Lima versus Rothwell in the co-main event, John?
Yeah, man, I let the hot takes fly on Leah Letson, Felicia Spencer. This fight, I don't have any real take whatsoever. Ben Rothwell's a guy that bores me to death most of the time. Like, I don't like betting on him, but I also really don't like betting against him either. So it's a pass for me as well. I'm kind of gonna play more de Lima on DraftKings just because he's the guy who has the upside in this fight, and just hope that he gets it done here. But I'm not, it's definitely not something I'm confident in. Like, yes, he hits harder. Maybe he can hurt Rothwell early in the fight before he gasses. I'd be surprised if we see him put on like a repeat performance like he did against Maurice Green, where he just legitimately looks like Curtis Blades out there. Like, I doubt we see that against Ben Rothwell. But yeah, I'm probably just gonna take a stance on de Lima on DraftKings and just hope for the best. But it's definitely not a fight that I have really any conviction on whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly didn't look like Felicia Spencer on top there. He spent like 14 minutes in control and landed 14 significant strikes. Felicia Spencer would literally never. She would have finished the fight in one against Maurice Green. But I think your take here with Lima on DK is like probably the right way to approach this fight. His win equity is closely tied, I think. To an early finish, he's only plus 125 in the betting market, plus 135, I think, in some spots. Like, I don't know. There's not a lot of, I know you're going to be jamming in all the Leah Letson and Colin Anglin you can on DK, but like, there's not a lot of dogs that I love this weekend. And like, de Lima possesses some upside. I think he'll probably be owned. No real opinion on the fight, but I think de Lima on DK is probably the strongest stance I'll take coming into the weekend. Anything for you here on this riveting co-main event, or should we get to the main event, John?
No, but now that you brought that up, I might have to think of some sort of giveaway or promo or something for if we see the optimal has either Leah Letson or Colin Anglin now.
So bad you need 2 outs, but I guess they're both plus 300. We'll think of something fun to do about that. I'll let you handle that portion of the show this weekend. Let's move on to the main event here. We got Max Holloway, currently a massive minus 720 favorite. He's $9,500 on DK. He faces Yair Rodriguez, who comes back plus 500 for Yair, who has not fought in over 2 years. He's $6,700 on DK. And on paper, John, Yair Rodriguez is probably, look, I'm not a huge Yair Rodriguez fan in terms of like how good I think he is, but probably one of the better fighters you'll see around plus 500. Any interest for you in the underdog this weekend, or is this like a prime Max Holloway spot at minus 700?
Yeah, you know me, man. I can't bet against our guy Max. I feel like me and you have bet on Max like pretty much every fight since we started doing this, like a year and a half ago. So
I think we're 1-2 though, right?
It hasn't been that good. We had that controversial decision against Volkanovski that I thought we cast as a decent underdog, but yeah, I mean, you can't really bet him in any form here. Maybe. I think I saw a knockout plus 150 on FanDuel. That's kind of interesting. If Max is going to sit there and these guys are going to throw 300 or 400 strikes, like I think he has a decent chance to finish here. Probably better than plus 150 by knockout, but we'll see. I mean, I don't have anything on him now, but I definitely think he's the side. I think he's the better striker. I think he's got a clear volume advantage, clear cardio advantage, clear durability advantage. I think he's just the better striker here, outside of like some sort of flashy kick KO or something, which I think is probably like a 5 to 7% outcome. Like I think Max is probably going to cruise here.
Yeah, I've seen some people on the Yair side. Shout out to Tajik Bey, who we had on last week. I think he was saying like Yair by decision, like plus 1,400. Good luck. I will not be jumping on that myself. I almost played Max. I almost actually Max bet Holloway at minus 400. And I honestly, like, I regret not doing it, man. Like, I looked into the fight for a long time, and I thought it was just gonna be like one-sided Max domination, but I dove into it deeper because I've been trying to do a weekly article on FTN bets for free. Obviously, all our work is for free, but just putting out a main event preview each week. So I dive a little bit deeper into the main event early in the week. Sometimes I get ahead on tape, sometimes I don't. But looked into this fight. I mean, Max should really dominate, man. Like, Yair does not have the wrestling level change at all, I think, in this fight. And in the striking, man, Yair's a decent striker, but it's a lot of that like outside kicking game. And Max is probably the best like volume pressure puncher we've ever seen in the UFC. And yeah, like I'm a little bit of a Max fanboy, obviously, but like he's just a tough guy to bet against historically, right? Like he has an unfair chin. At one point, his durability will go, and those people that have been betting Holloway to lose by KO for the last 5 years will win at some point, is my guess. But I really don't see it being this weekend, man. Like Yair, or Max, I should say, great cardio, great durability, great volume. Like I just think that he dominates the fight. I wasn't planning on having a wager on the fight, but then PointsBet was hanging a minus 132. I'm going to check if that's still available, but minus 132 on Holloway to win in rounds or 4 or 5 or by decision. And I think that's kind of the best way I saw to play the fight. So I put a unit on that, kind of just a simple handicap, man. Like Max, we've seen him put up 450 significant strikes and not get guys out of there. And I will say Yair's been finished in both of his professional losses. He's a guy who I don't think is nearly as durable as a Calvin Kattar per se, but Max is someone that kind of kills you with volume over time. Like I don't think he's going to one punch knock out Yair Rodriguez early in this fight. I think it'll be an accumulation of damage, and Yair will kind of wilt as the fight goes on if Max is to get that knockout. But I said earlier in the week that I thought betting KO or decision is just kind of a guessing game, but I do think minus 132 on the 4-5 decision line is pretty good for Max Holloway. There's a chance he wins in the first 3 rounds, but I think there's a pretty low chance. Like I really think Yair is like less than 10% to win the fight. So handicap is simple, man. I just think Max is a way better striker in a fight that is going to be striking. It's hard to look minus 700 in a straight kickboxing match, but if anyone does it with relative consistency, it's Max Holloway. So I'll take him in this spot. I think he gets it done pretty easily, sweat-free. Certainly excited to watch him live, but the rest of the card, not great, but hopefully we helped you guys out, found some profitable spots on the card. John, if you have anything to add, either about the main event, co-main, any of the 11 fights we went over for UFC 42, feel free to do so, and if not, take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, only thing I have to add, guys, is hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Definitely appreciate the support. I always forget to plug that in the middle of the show, so for you 5 people that are still watching, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Definitely appreciate it. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a 5-star review as we continue to grow this show. We've actually only been on iTunes since December of last year. So it'll be cool to see how much we've been able to grow over the past 12 months. And we'll definitely share that with you guys as well. Appreciate all the constant support. As always, you can find our stuff at ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com, and you can find some additional MMA DFS stuff at fightnumbers.com, my website as well. Definitely appreciate it, guys. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.